My name is Aaron Walsh. I'm the director of the Immersive Education Initiative and also the newly established Knowledge Foundation. And I thought what I'd do today is share with you some of our work with the United Nations. So the focus is going to be on a broad spectrum of educational technologies that are built on blockchain. But in this particular focus, I'll talk primarily about the AI tools and something called the knowledge token. It's all part of the knowledge token system. Prior to taking directorship of the Knowledge Foundation, I was a faculty at Boston College from 1999 to 2023. And it was at that time that I departed the university to direct the foundation. And the foundation actually comes out of the Immersive Education Initiative. And actually, the technology that we'll talk about today also comes out of the Immersive Education Initiative. Now, here are some of the foundation's founding members. The two in particular that I'll speak about are at the end our international partners. But first, maybe what I'll do is talk about where we come from. So about 20 years ago, my work at Boston College was in virtual reality, video games, and computer science, and it was using VR, augmented reality, and simulations for education. And at that time, I started an open foundation, effectively, for using this technology for education. It was new at this time, and the focus was to apply virtual reality, augmented reality, simulators, and so forth to the educational experience. Amazingly, we're heading into our 20th year. We have thousands of members around the world, over 8,000 members now, and they represent millions of students who use these technologies. And it's really a broad range. We have the Ivy League universities and Smithsonian and other organizations, but also down to the homeschooled, where someone is in the home being taught by their parents. This is just an early slide from our early days, just some of our early collaborators in the work that we were doing. And it was this organization, Immersive Education, that gave rise to the Knowledge Foundation. And here we have our founding members of the foundation. And probably the most significant for today's purposes in the lower right-hand corner is the UN. I'll talk about our work there. The reason this started was with a very simple question. So in immersive education, again, we're using virtual reality for teaching and learning. And the idea was very simple, is that if we could create immersive experiences that would give the learner, the student, an opportunity to immerse themselves in the learning experience, they might enjoy it more, they might be more engaged, and they might become more educated through the process. And so it was simply using this technology for education that opened up this question, especially you see some of the young students here, especially in the young students' minds. They thought they were playing games. And they would often ask, well, what is my score? What is my score? And for the longest time, the answer was there is no score. You're being taught. We tried not to tell them that they were being educated, but they were in fact learning. Over a period of years, the question kept coming up, what's my score? What is my score? And eventually it dawned on me that we really needed a score. We needed to have a score, but it needed to be something more than just points on a board. It needed to be a reflection of the learning activity, and that's where the concept of a knowledge token took place. And the concept is very straightforward. It's simply tokenizing education. Now, so everyone at this conference probably understands the concept of tokenization, so I won't dive too much into that. But really, it's the notion of taking discrete learning activities, representing them in a digital manner, and then rewarding the students with a token that not only is an incentive and a reward token, but captures the learner data. So you have a fine-grained academic record. It's a family of currencies. One is the data token. The other is what we call the knowledge token, the intellectual currency. And that can be spent in a digital store for goods and services. Our work with the UN in particular is on essential goods and services, food, water, electricity, internet, so that you're learning, you're earning, and then you're using a decentralized store that is customized for the region in which the learner lives, so that when they're buying goods off the service, it's benefiting the local economy. So the token itself is not new. It was introduced in 2017 with the Italian Ministry of Education at a conference we had in Italy in collaboration with them. You can think of it as an incentivization and a reward system, and it's meant to be an actual platform. We call it a fabric, a global fabric. It's open, it's based on open standards, open source, and open participation. And the notion is quite simple, is that we look at it as the internet of education that anybody can plug into and utilize for learning and for incentivizing the learning activities. Just a few months ago, we introduced a formal partnership with the United Nations and with Dfinity, who is the makers, or at least the organization behind the Internet Computer. And it is a 3-year partnership. It's called Coding for Integrity 2.0, and it's based on a series of hackathons. The hackathons happen 4 times a year. I'll talk about that in a moment. But essentially, we have 2 major strands or threads of work that happen at these hackathons. One is on the development of AI tools for learning, and not a new concept at this point, but if you think about often where we're going with our collaboration with the United Nations, there are no teachers. There are very few people qualified to teach. But you can have somebody get students together in a room, in a shed, in a barn, in a shelter, and as long as you have an adult or a semi-adult who can kind of keep the peace, the device, the cell phone, the tablet, even a laptop, the device using AI can do the teaching. And then you can reward those learners with the token. So as part of our 3-year hackathon series, we have a suite of AI learning activities and tools. And we also have what we call at this point decentralized commerce, or DCOM. And that's the notion of a digital store where the tokens can be spent. And what we really don't want is we don't want the students to be learning, say, in Nigeria, earning their tokens and then buying stuff off of Amazon, if they even could. What we want is for the learning activity to benefit that community. So we want the tokens to go into the local economy. We want the store to be customized, decentralized, and connected to the local merchants. And the merchants are receiving the tokens, and then they can redeem the tokens for cash from the local banking system. So we're working on a global framework, not just for the technology, but for the organization's operations itself. The Knowledge Foundation is based out of Switzerland, but it is simply coordinating the activities. It's not directing them. Every region should decide how it utilizes the token in its education system. Every region should benefit from the economic activities of the token, and the banking system should be holding the reserves that back the token. So those are the 2 main, I'll call them tracks or product strands, the AI and the store. And this happens in what we call a seasonal relay hackathon, where 4 times a year hackathons happen: spring, summer, fall, and then in winter. And between the events, they're actually given professional developer grants, courtesy of Dfinity. The winners of the hackathons are brought into our team with the professionals. They refine and work on what they've been awarded from the hackathon. They improve it, refactor it, improve it again, and then they hand it off, and they're the ambassadors basically to the next hackathon. So we have a continuity that happens from hackathon to hackathon with professional development in between. And at the end of each year, we have what we call the hackathon of hackathons, which is prior to that, anybody can participate in the hackathons. We have 540 right now participants in the upcoming one this September in South Africa. But at the end of the year, at the hackathon of hackathons, only the participants who have won in a previous season that year can participate. They come together in person at a UN headquarters. This year it's at the UN in Vienna. Next year it's a UN conference in Qatar. And we have what amounts to a refinement hackathon where we're competing, but we're competing to get a product released together. So instead of waiting 3 years to release a product or a system, we release a major version of it each year. So if we take a look and see how we've done so far on the hackathons, even before we entered the relationship with the United Nations, we had our first one at Oxford in 2023 that kicked off the development of the knowledge token and the system. We had a follow-up this year, 2024. We then had a hackathon in Qatar, which was a very large one. It had, I believe, around 17, 18 different countries represented. with 100 and almost 20 participants. Here's photos from some portions of that. And there's the award ceremony. And these winners were given gold medals at a United Nations conference in Georgia. And you can see some of the gold medal winners there. Following that, we were in South Africa a little earlier this year, and we're coming back. In that particular one, we had 36 countries represented, 125 participants. And just 6 months or so later, a couple more countries represented. And right now, the number is at 541. This slide's a little bit out of date. And so if we look at this, again, the seasonal relay model for hackathons, what we've done to date, you can see the prizes for the professional development awards and the participation have been pretty steady. Qatar was particularly large, but they've been pretty steady, and especially now that we have the relationship with Definity and the UN is formalized for 3 years, we are sticking at the $70,000 worth of prizes at each event. But we really feel like the best is yet to come. I'd mentioned that the hackathon, we're having our very first hackathon of hackathons. That's at the UN in Vienna this year. So we're getting ready, as a lot of you developers here in the audience will understand. Getting ready to release something for the first time is pretty stressful, and the participants in the prior hackathons understand that. They're busy coding right now, getting it ready, so that when we come together in Vienna in early December, we'll have our hackathon of hackathons where we get version 1.0 out the door. It's important to note that this is an open standards activity. My background's in open international standards. For folks in the room, I worked in the MPEG group, I worked in the Web3 community, the VRML community, and the World Wide Web Consortium as well. And my focus has always been on open standards and open access, and it's no different with what we're doing here. We're talking about a global fabric, a collection of protocols and systems that are meant to benefit the world and meant to have longevity. They're meant to be sustainable indefinitely into the future. With that in mind, there are a number of technology groups. These are just a few, but to talk about how this works. The hackathon code actually feeds into the standardization process. It's refined, we receive feedback, and then they refine it again. And over a period of time, that code is polished, hardened, and prepared to become what's known as reference software for the international standards, so that anybody can build tools and products that utilize the system, the fabric, and they have source code to look at to see how it's done. There are a couple of key technology working groups that these standards activities happen through. The first was the AI and education technology working group. The other is the authentication and anti-fraud. One of the most important questions that you can ask when you have computer-mediated education is the person sitting at the end of that device really the student? Are they the ones who should be given the tokens when they complete their quiz, when they complete their coursework? This is particularly important. We're looking not at a product in the sense where we develop a product and get it out and sell it. It's free. This is not something that we're profiting off of. Most importantly, we're looking at a strong foundation, architecture and security. So a lot of our work is going into authentication and anti-fraud. We've recently begun exploring a partnership with a cybercrimes group in the United Nations for real-time analysis of the transactions for early fraud detection, for example. We're also particularly focused on protecting the learner. When you think about everybody in this room, if I had a wallet, you have a wallet, we all go down and get a coffee, or we go out to lunch or dinner tonight, probably our funds are safe. We're not necessarily going to be targeted. But in a lot of areas and regions where resources are scarce, you can't actually put a digital wallet on a young child's phone, assuming they even have a phone, maybe they're given one or loaned one, and expect them to be safe. So in addition to security, we're focused on protecting the learners. And what does that mean? Well, in the era of quantum computing, it means quantum-resistant algorithms and encryption to go onto the chain. It doesn't do us a whole lot of good to spend the first couple of years churning out academic credentials and encrypting the user identity if, when the time comes, quantum computing can crack that and basically lay bare who all the learners are, where their funds are. It could cause a disaster and a very serious loss of life. So we're protecting the learners very seriously, dealing with quantum encryption at an early stage on top of blockchain. And then naturally we have some fundamental issues. When you look at blockchains, there is the promise that the blockchain will always be up 24/7, never go down 100% uptime. And that would be great if we could be sure of that. But I think I've been in the industry long enough to know that certainties become uncertain under circumstances that we never anticipated. And one of the things we have to assume in order to deliver this globally and reliably is to assume that at some point the entire network had a catastrophic failure for reasons that we don't anticipate. And what happens then? Well, again, everybody in this room, if you were locked out of your wallet for a day or two, you probably would be okay. If you lost all your funds in your wallet, I would guess most of you would recover from that, hopefully. But in a lot of the regions we're going into, this is all the money they've ever earned. It's the only academic credentials that they have, the only proof that they were educated, their only hope of getting out of the environment, if there is a hope. And so to have a system that goes down or is compromised and has the tokens that they have, that is basically their currency, it's their bread and their butter, and the proof that they were educated, that would give them an opportunity to continue being educated or get a job, that's an untenable situation. So we have the notion of a backup and recovery, where if the system goes down, we can bring it back up on an alternate chain within a reasonable amount of time with no loss of data and no compromise identity. The final working group, and this isn't the only one, the final one that we're focused on is scaling. So we talk about blockchains. I think most in the room understand that they have some scaling issues. We're working on a lot of different scaling issues, but our focus is on a global learning community, not just formal education, but informal, which means billions of people earning tokens every day, all day long possibly, and also transacting in those tokens. And so that means we need to scale the system in a way that hasn't been seen before. And on top of that, the base token is an NFT. It captures learner data, so it has to be non-fungible and unique to the learners. And so we need to scale those in a way that currently there are no immediate solutions, which is why these standards groups have been put in place. We're in the early stage, and I think a very promising conversations with the Web3 Foundation for exactly some of the things I just talked about. One is working on the international standards, bridging knowledge token to Polkadot. And in particular, bullet number 3 there for me is particularly interesting because it seems that Polkadot has the ability to allow us to run offline for an indeterminate amount of time until the network comes back and then resynchronize. This is important for what I've been calling the last mile, but it really is sort of like the last dusty path. We're going down into villages where they have no real stable electricity or internet, but they still have a need to learn and to earn and to change their conditions. And it seems that Polkadot has the ability to be implemented in that last footpath down to the ecosystem or down into the environment where the infrastructure is not stable. Network goes down, electricity goes down for as long as the phone is alive. You can continue to learn, you can continue to earn, and when it comes back online, resynchronizes all the way up. That's, to me, very promising. And then the last opportunity I think we have to work with the Web3 Foundation is through something we call our accelerators. Up until now, when we've had these hackathons, we basically have left the region in a vacuum. We have the hackathon, we have a great event, and then we leave and there's nothing behind for them. The knowledge accelerators are smaller, more nimble, self-sustaining organizations that have their own funding for hackathons, their own funding for continued events, so that you can have in a region continue to develop its own skill set, so that we don't just have an event in a region. They actually are left with something to continue to propel their development as technologists. Knowledge accelerators are focused not just on blockchain, but on emerging technologies. So you'll have a knowledge accelerator that works with immersion, video game technology, AI, blockchain, and so forth. All with these regular ongoing activities that stimulate their interest and hopefully feed them back into our development program at some point down the line. So that, in a nutshell, that's what we've been doing. That's what our work is about. But I think it's worth, as we start to conclude, maybe taking a moment to say, when is a token not worth a token? For those in the in the audience here who might be saying, well, what's the token worth? It's not pegged to a single currency. It's not pegged to a dollar or to a euro or even to a Swiss franc. It's pegged to the International Monetary Fund's SDR, a special drawing right. And that means it's represented by a basket of global currencies and can be exchanged for the proper amount at any time. So one knowledge token is worth one SDR. And depending on when you choose to spend it and what currency it needs to be spent in, it'll be used at the ongoing exchange rate to give you however much that's worth in dollars or euro or yen and so forth. But the question then comes up is like, why are we really doing this? What is the focus for this work? And it really is the answer to this question is, when is a token not worth a token? So some of these photos, they look like, and they are professional photos, but these are real families. And the first two are from the United States. So I'm from Boston. I was raised in Colorado. And you don't often think of the United States as being in this kind of a situation, but it is true. There are families that are impoverished, that are struggling. A lot of the schools we've worked with actually have the children showing up in the morning, not to go to school, but because of the hot breakfast. And they're staying because of the hot lunch. And then they're staying to the end of the school day so that they can get the snacks at the end of the day. It's basically a food program. And some of the schools we work with, 98% of the students are on that program. So there's a big problem. And this is when the token becomes worth more than a token. And if you were to look beyond just impoverished families and communities, and you start to look at the global scenario for forced labor, you start to see approaching, not quite, but starting to approach the entire population of the United States of child laborers. These are children that are taken out of the education system at a young age, around the age that they can actually start to work. And they're put into labor. They're put into factories, they're put into fields, and that's because the family either owes debt that they need to pay back, which, by the way, they never get out of. It's this reoccurring debt that goes generation to generation to generation. But the children are taken out of any kind of education that could give them some hope and a future, pressed into labor. The other is that they've got to work all day for what amounts to a dollar or a euro. Sometimes they have to work up to a week. A single token, one learning activity, can be worth more than a day doing that kind of work. So when you look at the token and you look at the protocols and you look at the ecosystem that we're developing, it can be used for all forms of education, from childhood, formal education, all the way to university, graduate degree, so forth. But for me personally and for our work with the United Nations, it really is focused on the individuals in the communities, in the regions where this is the normal way of life. This is what happens at a certain age. And if it takes a day or a week to earn $1 or €1, if you could do the same thing in a community center, a hut, a farm, any place where you had access to a mobile device and someone willing to show you how to get started, then you could start to change these lives significantly. And what happens in a community where a child who normally would be doing this type of work all day long, or as long as they physically can, day after day, what happens when they can make more than that sitting in a room learning? Well, it starts to change the conversation about how you make money. It starts to change the conversation about how you as a family start to survive. It takes just one, and then almost certainly siblings and maybe even parents, and then entire communities. So in this way, we look at what the token is worth and why we'd be putting such effort into it over many years is because if successful, and I have every reason to believe we will be, if successful, it can start to lift people out of the situations through a learning education process. And because the digital store, feeds into the communities where the tokens are earned are also benefiting economically from this. So there's potential to really have an impact, and that's the reason I'm here today, is to share this with you and also invite you, if you feel like there's a way that you would like to participate, there are many ways, and I'll be open. We have 2 of us here today and another 2 tomorrow. If you're at a university, a foundation, or institution, there are ways to collaborate and participate in hosting the events, having research and students involved. If you're a business, there's sponsorship, of course, but we also have software engineers and programmers on assignment who are helping to develop this in a professional capacity. They can also act as mentors. And you can, of course, use the token in a business environment. So I'm joined this week, or these next couple days, by Janne. In fact, Janne Frenske, if you can't reach me and you'd like to talk, he's like 1 more hour before he has to head to the airport, maybe 40 minutes. Janne has a history in the United Nations, a career in the UN. He's the one that introduced me to the colleagues in the UN to start this. The first person he introduced me to is Leonardo. And Leonardo is now the Director of Partnerships and Youth Engagement for the Foundation. He'll be here tomorrow. So if you feel like there's an opportunity for us to work together, please let one of the 3 of us know. And with that, I'll say there are a couple of other collaborators outside of us today that I would be happy to put you in touch with. And you're always very welcome. I'll just say we'll end here. Always very welcome to reach me if you'd like through the link up here or through LinkedIn. So thank you for your time.